So here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at Genesis 1 today, and I'm going to ask for some patience, okay? We are going to be in Genesis 1 and 2 for probably 4 or 5 weeks. That being said, it's not going to be exactly in order. Over the summer, myself, Logan, and Michelle, one day were gathering all the coins that the kids brought for missionaries, and they were in a big pile. And think for yourself, if you can, for a second. Like, you have this pile of coins. Instead of bringing it to a coin star, you need to begin to parse those coins out. So you gather all the quarters, you put them on all the little paper things, you gather all the nickels, and you gather all the dimes. You probably leave the pennies because they're useless, right? You go through and you gather all of these coins. That's how we're going to treat Genesis 1. Meaning today, we're going to go and we're going to gather all of the quarters from Genesis 1. And so you may be going like, well, it mentioned the Trinity, or at the beginning of chapter 2, what about Sabbath, or young earth, old earth? Breathe, my man, okay? It's so much doctrine here about human sexuality and human dignity that can be unpacked. We will go back to the pile of coins and pull that coin out. Today, our goal is just to pull the quarters, okay? We're going to gather all this together, and then we'll come back to that same pile and we'll address it. So the hope is, the overarching tone today is as if you and I did not understand where this story came from. We didn't know much about Christianity. I know a lot of you were raised in the church, and so a lot of this is familiar. You heard what Belle read, and you're going, yeah, I know the story, right? I want to unpack kind of some fascinating elements of it for sure, but there's 3 things I'm going to try to accomplish. Number 1, so I'm going to use this word brilliance. I think there's a brilliance to the structure that I want to be able to talk about. One of my pastoral buddies says that sometimes Christians are accused of having Genesis being written by mouth-breathing knuckle draggers. What he means by that is like cavemen, right? It's almost as if the culture looks at us and goes like, oh, my name Moses, I write the book of Genesis, right? And yet there are literary devices in Genesis that today nobody can compete with. It is brilliantly written. So I want to talk about that. And then I just want to talk about like the brilliance of what is actually found in Genesis 1. And then lastly, the brilliance that how all this comes to be, like who and how and all of that. I'm not a big like have points in a sermon type of dude, but I think it was helpful to understand if we're going to go at this chapter again and again and again. So let's do it. Let's start our long trek. Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 is where we start. And we will look at verse 1 and 2 only next week. Okay, so here's chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So let's stop there. We're going to do this for the next year, so it's going to be a big Bible study together. First thing I want you to see is the heavens and earth, when it mentions there, could probably, and is actually probably a better little translation of sky and land. You're going to find the word earth translated in the rest of the Bible as country, earth, field, ground, land, and even a couple times nations. The word heavens is only translated 2 other ways, which is skies that we'll see, and then there's a few times where it's mentioned as stars. Okay, so heavens and earth, or land and sky, maybe be a good way to understand that. That being said, I will say there's no apologetic for this God figure. If you don't know much about Christianity and you choose to read the book of Genesis, it's not giving you this like cosmological argument and then therefore there is a God. It just assumes this God figure. Now, up to this point in our story, we don't know much about this God figure, but we do know one thing. He creates things out of nothing. There's 2 words in Hebrew that you can use to create something. One is to create something out of something. The other is to create something out of nothing, which if you grew up in church, you know that word ex nihilo is the word that's used here, and it's only used for God. And that's the word that's used here, and we will revisit that word next week. So in the beginning, God created. He makes something out of nothing, and we're going to see what he makes. This leads us to verse 2. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. Now, the camera has 2 options based on verse 1. It could follow the heavens, or it could follow the earth, and it's going to start with the earth. So verse 2 says, and the earth. So what about the heavens? We'll come back to that. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. The best way to understand that word without form, or more importantly, void, honestly, the best translation is nothingness. It's empty. And in the first service, this didn't work at all, so let's try it again in the second service. When I grew up, we had something called bunny ears, and when the trying to get the signal, the magic, waves in the sky, however it worked, the screen would be like real black and white, it'd be like shh, which I'm assuming everyone, even if you don't have to be over the age of 30 to at least know that screen, and that's the sound that it makes. It was like shh, right? Well, these newer, fancy TVs, these smart TVs here, they do something a little bit different that I think might be helpful in understanding what a void is in Hebrew. So if there's a moment where you have nothing plugged into any of the inputs, what's going to happen on these smart TVs? It's going to say no signal, okay? There's going to be 0 signal. But if you're poor like me and you still want to watch like TV, you can put in your house one of these like, they are like bunny ears, but now they're shaped differently. They're little pads or whatever, right? And you can put it, and it's going to gather the signals. And what's interesting is I was watching college football last night, and sometimes when a car drives by, it glitches kind of for a second. I don't know how to describe it, but it kind of glitches. It's the signal's there, but it's trying to grab the signal. In some ways, some of us have thought of Genesis 1:2 like that. Like there is something there, it just needs to make clarity of the signal, but that's not it at all. This word void would be on a smart TV, no signal. There's no input, there's nothing there. So it's not like God is taking something there and he's forming it into a picture. There is nothing. There is nothing. And so he makes something out of nothing in this void. And in the middle of this nothing, notice also in verse 2, the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. The Spirit in Hebrew is the same in Greek. You can translate it spirit, you can translate it wind, you can translate it breath. But the idea is the Spirit of God is in the middle of that chaos, that void, that nothingness. That's where he is. He's existing. And then I think this is, at the end of verse 2, is a way for us now to understand he's going to move forward and start creating. And I say that because if you can, look at verse 3 with those first three words, and God said, starts a cadence, okay? The cadence, the tempo of verses 3 through 25 is the same, okay? So I need you to understand that because when there's a change in the cadence, that's going to matter to us. If you're a good Bible reader, you should recognize that. And there's going to be a few things in this cadence that you can recognize. Number one, you're going to notice each one of these things in the cadence, it starts with God said. Then in the middle of what God is doing, he calls it good. And at the end of what he is doing, Moses wants to say, and that was the end of the first day, the second day, the third day. Okay? So there's going to be a rhythm to what we're about to make. But the Spirit is hovering over. As he hovers over, now we're going to get something out of this nothing. There's going to be this creation. All right? So let's do it if we can. Let's start in verse 3. Oh my gosh, I'm supposed to show you an image. I forgot this in first service. Okay, let me show you this image. So we're going to start in verse 3, but I have to show you this for this to make sense. There's going to be 6 days of creation. We'll talk about the 7th day in a second. But in these 6 days of creation, the best way to understand them is to correlate to one another. So days 1, 2, and 3, day 1 goes with day 4, day 2 goes with day 5, and day 3 goes with day 6. And I don't know the right word for this, but days 1, 2, and 3 seem to... I don't know if the word sphere is the right word or the realm. I don't know what the right word here is, but there's a space. He's going to make a space by separating things. And the first day we're going to see he's going to separate light and darkness. And then the next arena, he's going to separate the sky from the ocean. And then in the third one, he's going to separate the ocean, kind of parse it out and have there be land. And then from there, he's going to add inhabitants to it. Somebody had asked me, one of my buddies asked me, why are Adam and Eve white? It's not a statement of any kind. It's what you would see in kids ministry. It's not some racial profiling. Just relax, okay? Verse 3, and God said, let there be lights, and there was lights. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning the first day. So the first thing he's going to separate is light and darkness. Now, we're going to have to come back and revisit this. Right now, we're just gathering quarters. We'll come back to the dimes, okay? Because what you believe about old earth or young earth actually has a lot to say with how you interpret day 1. As a matter of fact, honestly, there's a... his name is Zev Raber, I think is what it is. Rabbi Zev Raber. He has 13 interpretations that Jews have of day 1. In Protestant views, I mean, there are views that say this first day of light and darkness is when God makes energy, because like light is the most simple form of energy. Some would say he's not making light at all, but it's a sense of calling of morality. If you're old earth, at this moment, he may be making like the outer space. And then in day 4, if you look at verse 14, that's when he makes the sun and the moon in our solar system. If you're young earth, this is his Shekinah glory. So we're going to unpack all of that. Day 1 is the most confusing, so we're going to have to come back and unpack that. But he makes and separates light and day. So breathe. We will come back to it, okay, in the coming weeks. And God said... This is the second day. God said, let there be an expanse. So the cadence continues in the midst of the waters. And let it separate the waters from the waters. And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. So now, in this kind of nothingness, there's this water, which is interesting. This verse is used a lot for some of our flat earth homies because there's something called a firmament. And ironically, NASA calls Earth a water planet because it says there's water on the ground and also in the sky, whether it be vapor, clouds, or at this time a firmament. Kent Ham would say there's a block of ice surrounding the earth at this time. We'll come back to all of that. Right now, it's just our structure that we're getting at. We're pulling quarters. That being said, we read it just as a casual reader. Think of yourself as a 12-year-old again. I'm reading Genesis, and maybe think of yourself as an 8-year-old, okay? As an 8-year-old, you're not wondering if there's a block of ice around the earth. You just notice that God made the sky, and he made the seas. That's it. He separated skies and sea. That's all that's going on, okay? I know there's so much to it, and as I said, we'll get to it. Verse 9, and God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, the fruit trees bearing fruit, in which in their seed is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth. And it was so. Verse 12, the earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bear fruit in which their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening, and there was morning the third day. If you can, look at the end of verse 10. Okay, and then at the end of verse, 12. This time there's two it was goods. That's weird, right? Well, in day 3, there's a separation. This time the separation is for the water that was below. There's still the water above, but now he wants to separate the water below, and he could separate it by walls, or he could separate it by fire, but he separates it by land. Okay, so now there's this land, and so we get oceans and lakes and seas. But then it goes on, and day 3, and this is very important to the cadence, gives a detail. Days 1 and 2 didn't get more detail. Day 3 gets a detail. That's going to be important because day 6 gets a detail. Day 3 gets a detail that land is not meant to be barren. It's not to be just like this desert, but it's meant to have this life, this vegetation, these forests. It's meant to have fruit trees. So peaches and nectarines are all this kind of product of what God is doing here on day 3. And then he says again, and that was good. All right? This leads us to day 4, fourth day. And God said, let the lights, so we're going to go back to this whole day 1, what happened with the light and darkness. And God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years, and let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. Verse 17, and God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning the 4th day. So first God builds the house, and now he's moving in, if that makes sense. He's bringing, so there's a sense of the first 3 days seem to be the structure of a home, and now he's going to put furniture and pictures on the walls, and he's going to put backsplashes or whatever it is, right? So there's a home that's built, and now he's going to fill that home. And what we see is that honestly, they're filled. We get what's called a telos here of this purpose. The purpose of the sun, the moon, the stars are, quote, to be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. So there's a sense that now we have, filling in that separation of light and darkness, we have names for, we have the sun, and we have the moon, and we have the stars, okay? But he's still not done. He wants to fill the other parts of the earth. Verse 20, and God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures. Let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens. So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening, and there was morning the 5th day. And so now there's this filling. And you can see it here. There's this filling of air life, and there's this filling of like water life. There's birds and what we think of as fish. There's wings, there's fins, however you want to describe it. There's this, and they are actually told their telos. So now God, going back to day 2, and when he separates the sky and he separates the water, if you just have sky and water, he puts birds in the sky and he puts fish in the water. But he's still not done, because what happened on day 3 is he gave us land. So how is he going to fill land? There's already vegetation, but he's not done. Day 6. That's what we're on, right? Day 6. Where are we at? That it was good. Yep, there it is. Okay, I think right. Yeah, verse 24. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their kinds. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. But notice day 6 isn't done again. Remember day 3? does the same thing. You're going to get 2 it was good. So the first part of this is he makes creatures. I don't know, so the 2 separations here that I would make, and I'm not saying I'm right on this, the way I'd understand it is he makes livestock, but he also makes beasts of the earth. Livestock, again, I'm not saying I'm right, but I'm tending to categorize even the term livestock, not just as farm animals like cows and chickens and stuff like that, but there's a sense of like tamed animals. And then the way that we'd understand some of the words that are used here, then there are untamed animals, bears and like tigers, no matter what the Tiger King would say, right? There's a sense that there are these wild beasts that also exist out there. And then there's like creeping things, which is always the classic like spiders and grasshoppers. Like, why would you make a mosquito? Is that a flying thing? Can I kill it? Like, there's always these weird things, which you can and should, right? But there's things that God just makes in all that. And I would categorize maybe creeping things, and I'm not saying this is perfect, because I understand there's a whole hierarchy of animal kingdom, but that's everything that is not livestock or tamed animals and wild beasts, which are untamed animals. There's frogs in that or whatever, okay? I'm not saying that's perfect. What I will say is Scripture wants to be clear. God made every living thing, okay? And he takes all those living things and he puts it around the vegetation on the land. So now the earth is full, but he's not done. Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish and of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over the livestock, over the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish and of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with the seed in its fruit. You shall have them for food. Verse 30, and to every beast of the earth and every bird of the heavens and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life, I have given every green plants for food. And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the 6th day. Okay. There's so much here. Remember, we're just gathering one coin right now. We got to come back to this whole thing and human dignity and human sexuality. We'll come back to these verses. For now, though, what I want you to see is the change of cadence. I've done this with us before, but remember, when the story is telling you part A, part B, part C, part D, part A, part B, part C, part D, part A, part B, part C, part D, part A, part B, part C. Part A, Part B, Part D. We notice then, because there's the cadence, we should recognize in literature format, there's something missing there or there's something added here. And there are changes. We did not get a conversation in the Trinity up to this point. It was this strong cadence for 25 verses, and now suddenly God's talking to himself. He's talking to angels. He's using the royal we. What's happening here? Which we will unpack the Trinity in the coming weeks. But for now, the cadence changes. That's all I want us to see. Now, there's a few observations that I think is worth bringing out outside of the cadence changing, but because the cadence changing. First thing is this. We now go back to the fruits and the vegetables that were made on day 3. I am not a vegetarian, but I at least have to observe in this text, before the fall, Liver King's going to be upset, but before the fall, it seems that human beings and all living creatures were to be vegetarians. They were to live off the sea, okay? You may not like that, all right? It's fine. Eat as much meat as you want. That's fine. I'm just telling you, on this text, at least based on this text, that's what we have right now, okay? And there could be, I've heard some pretty wonky arguments as to the latter, but if you read this for what it is what it is. There's no death at this point, so I don't know how you eat an animal and not kill it, okay? But there's been crazier things that are done. The next thing I want you to notice is that we see at the end of our section here, he doesn't say things are good, he says things are very good. This is in light of man being made. I think that's worth observing as well. And then, of course, there's this big understanding that up to this point, plants and frogs and stars and the moon and wild beasts, none up to this point have been described as being into the one who is making them's image. Suddenly man is made, and man is made in God's image. Now this is curious because now man, being made in God's image, is given his telos. So the plants are made for eating. The sun and the moon are so that we can understand the seasons, right? So what is the telos that we got at the same telos with birds and fish? They were to fill the earth and multiply. We understand that. So in all of that taking place, now we get the same direction for mankind, but there's an addition. It says, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth, but he adds here, subdue it and have dominion. Subdue it and have dominion. This is where we do have to stop because I do think it's pertinent to the rest of the story, especially as we go into day 7. there's a sense that we understand that in being image bearers of God, we're not just to take care of creation, but in our Dutch Calvinist tradition, there's something more beautiful. That we pull from guys like Leslie Newbegin and Abraham Kuyper, that in a covenantal view of creation, we can actually understand that it's not our job just to, fight global warming, which is a whole separate conversation I'm not going to get into right now. Whatever, I'm not going to touch that right now, okay? However, it's not just to hug trees. No. There's something more here that's being communicated in the text. And it's not just to maintain this creation, but we are actually to take the creation that God has made and make things out of it. And our tradition is strong with this idea that mankind is responsible to perfect creation. That in us being created, the very goodness involves our involvement with taking a sheep, shearing it, taking that wool, and then making mittens. God didn't make mittens, but man made mittens out of what God made. And so let me read something to you, somewhat of a long quote, but beautiful, by a guy named Abraham Kuyper. He says this: creation was fashioned by God, fashioned with life that surges and scintillates in its bosom, fashioned with the powers that lie dormant in its womb. Yet lying there, it displayed but half its beauty. Now, however, God crowns it with humanity, who awakens its life, arouses its powers, and with human hands brings to light the glory that once lay locked in its depths, but had yet not shone on its countenance. So you have creation, but then he crowns creation with mankind, and mankind is to take all the secret hidden gems in creation and create himself. Now, this is the trajectory of mankind. The story is now communicating to us that God has given all that he has made to mankind. And he says, I don't want you just to maintain it. I want you to have dominion over it. I want you to create like I created of it. This beam, God didn't go, let there be metal beams. I mean, this is insane that right now a roof is being held up by a beam that I do not think we understand the human ingenuity it took to make. I mean, I honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, I have no idea how metal even comes outside of Minecraft mining for ore. There's a sense that this was made, and I genuinely don't know how it was done. But that's what man has done. Now, he's not done. He's not done. Listen to what he says. You need glance only at the terrain of our habitation and ask what it once was in its natural state and what it has become through the energetic activities of our ancestors. Meaning, think of Phoenix, Arizona 1,000 years ago. What did Phoenix look like? What it looks like, right? So, and you could know what it's looked like. Just drive 4 hours west, and you'll see what it looked like. It was just desert. Just desert. And yet here we are, and you can say what you want about cities, and I get it. There's all time. But we have made things. Human ingenuity has made things. And so his point is, look at the past terrain, and look what our ancestors did. Man did that. And that's what man is supposed to do. He's still not done. He says, this power lay embedded in that creation from the time of Eden already, but only now has it been discovered, analyzed, and harnessed by the Spirit of man. In short, there's a perfecting of that creation that the Lord now completes through him, or through man. So the idea is that man is to take creation and discover what's already there. The greatest example of this is electricity. Now, we may have figured out how to harness electricity, but man did not invent electricity. We discovered it. So electricity, static electricity existed in the, I don't know when electricity, when we discovered it, but let's just say during the time of Jesus. But they didn't have it. In 0 AD, they did not have electricity. Though it existed, nobody had discovered it yet. And so we discovered electricity. I mean, we discovered the internet. It was already there. We just discovered, no, I'm just kidding. Okay, so you can understand what we're doing with this. There are other things locked in creation that we are to discover, that God has embedded in there. Now, that's amazing. I mean, that is fascinating in the story. The reason it's fascinating is chapter 2, verse 1, I think in the first 3 verses, communicates that is how all of eternity is and was supposed to be. That without Genesis 3, for the rest of mankind's existence, which is all of eternity, we were to be in partnership with God, making things out of what he has made. Now, we're going to find out in Genesis 3 that's not the case. I would argue when Jesus restores us, he doesn't just restore our soul, but he restores our eternal partnership with God, that one day we will be on this earth continuing to create, which is a longer conversation, but we'll talk about it whenever we teach through the book of Revelations, not now. Okay, chapter 2, verse 1, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. Notice in chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Chapter 2, verse 1, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, right? So it seems to be a capstone of what he had said, and all the host of them. Verse 2, and on the seventh day God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day for all of his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all of his work that he had done in creation. We'll talk about Sabbath at one point. Why does God need to rest? The age of the earth, all that's there, but you got to give it time. For now, I just want you to see, at minimum, I think day 7, I want to contend with you in the order in which things are going. Day 7 is meant to be the ongoing ideal. So day 6, 6 days, God makes all these things, and then day 7 is meant to be moving forward. That's how the story's going to go. God now rests from his work, and now mankind works. I mean, it's amazing. Work is not a product of the fall. We will work for all of eternity. Hard work is, but work is not, right? And so there's a sense that there's a beauty to that. So much so that it might be hard to see some of this, but 7 is emphatically placed in chapters 1 and 2 for us to see again and again that the seventh day matters. As a matter of fact, notice the rhythm. There are not just 7 days, but if you know Hebrew, in chapter 1, verse 1, there are 7 words in chapter 1, verse 1. In chapter 1, verse 2, there are 14 words, because 1 times 7 is 7, but 2 times 7 is 14. Starting in chapter 2, there are 3 sets of 7 that explain the 7 days. And so there's a rhythm that God wants us to point to. This moment matters, that we are to go forward and continue to partner with God one day because of Jesus' work for all of eternity, and continuing to make things that he had made, okay? Now that's our story. Let me just leave it there for what it is. That's the brilliance of the structure. And that's hard for a caveman to do, right? It is. I mean, there is a brilliance there that is outside of the literary devices that we understood of the time. There is a brilliance there. Now I want us, if we could, to stop for a second and look at the brilliance of actually what just happened. One of my concerns was moving forward that my daughter Anna, who is 8, would be lost in the age of the earth and human sexuality and what do we do with the Sabbath? And there's all these philosophical questions which we will ask and answer from Genesis 1, but not look at this text like a child like Anna would. And honestly, if I was to walk Anna through the book of Genesis, chapters 1 and 2, I would bring out some things that I think were different than all of those things that I mentioned. And we'll get into, is the earth this many years old or billions of years old? But right now, if we could, let's just stand in awe of what just took place. And if we could, I know you grew up in church and you already know all the days. Can we think of this creation account like a child again for a second? And here's what I'd like to do to be able to do that. If you can, look at day 3. Day 3, God makes at the end of day 3, that additional part, he makes all that vegetation, right? Well, there's more to it. I don't know if you know, but in the next couple of years, my goal is to get an arborist license. I'm fascinated by trees. Let me show you a picture. This is called a mycorrhiza network, okay? A mycorrhiza network is the largest network of anything. What's the word I'm looking for? I forget the word. Anyway, it's a network of fungus that live on roots, which are good for the roots. It's the largest in the entire world. That trees actually communicate. They dubbed it the Wood Wide Web. Okay, it sounds like Elmer Fudd saying the Wood Wide Web. Okay, but they've dubbed it the Wood Wide Web because what they discovered in the last 100 years is that trees communicate with one another. We're talking, this is some Lord of the Rings stuff right now. They are communicating with one another in such a way that when one tree is sick, it will send nutrients. The forest will send nutrients to another tree. They will warn each other of pests. They will take care of one another. This is fact. So when God makes all of the vegetation that he makes, it's not that, yeah, he made trees. You guys, he made this mycorrhiza network that exists within trees. That's bonkers. This is fascinating stuff. Okay, maybe that's not enough for you. So he goes on to fill the seas that he made, and he mentions the beasts, the large animals. Let me introduce you to a small animal. This is called the pistol shrimp. The pistol shrimp exists, obviously, on the bottom of the sea, but puts its claws together so fast that for a brief moment and gathering bubbles together, the bubbles come together and hit the temperature of the sun for a brief second. The temperature of the sun. It either disables or kills its prey. This thing has the power to kill you, and it's a tiny little pistol shrimp. And it just shoots these bubbles at this. So God's making all of these things, and he makes a pistol shrimp. And you're going like, I wasn't even thinking about that. And this is what he's doing. but maybe that's not enough for you. I don't know if you know this, but Candace and I next spring are going to get some bees. And we're going to get a beehive, harvest honey, and all that. And you may not be aware of this, but bees actually communicate by dancing with one another. What they do is a bee finds a flower, and it says, hey, I want to tell you where this flower is. And they do what is called a wiggle dance. So notice that all the other bees are watching this bee. Now, this bee is communicating something that you and I don't fully understand. It's communicating to the inch exact coordinates based on the sun where to find this one flower. It's telling bees, when you leave the hive, go exactly in this direction according to the sun, and you will find the flower. From 90 degrees to 92 degrees to 60 degrees, based on how it wiggles its butt, it's communicating, and it's vibrating. It's vibrating, I don't know why that added that extra syllable, vibrating, okay? But it's vibrating around, and the other bees are watching it. Okay, to 48 now, okay, got it, and they're out, right? That's crazy. That's crazy that he's making bees, and we're going, like, I don't know, they could sting me. They could sting you? That's all you got from bees? Like think of the insanity. Just for a second, remember what it was like to be a kid and think of these things. But I'm still not done. There's one more that's so bizarre that combines the days. Let me show you this picture. This is the dung beetle. The dung beetle, if you're not aware, obviously based on its name, will gather dung and it will roll it back to the home that it lives. Scientists figured out about 30 years ago that dung beetles take the dung that they gather and go in a perfect straight line to where they live. They can gather it perfectly. But what they noticed is, as they were studying dung beetles, is that in going a straight line, when it was overcast, dung beetles didn't know where to go. They started to wander a little bit. And so what they did is they did an experiment, and they put these little hats, okay, on these dung beetles because they were trying to figure out what was going on. And here's what they realized. Dung beetles use the stars to circumnavigate where they are. Like literally celestial navigation. You don't even know how to circumnavigate. And these beetles, this is where your tax dollars are going, the study of dung beetles, okay? They covered their eyes so they couldn't see, and what they noticed is the beetle just wandered around until it died. It needed the stars. It needed the stars. And you're sad about a dung beetle, okay? So you know what, though? It's God's creation. You're right, okay? We should care, okay? The point being is, like, God is literally like, he's making the stars for seasons for us, yes. We're not even thinking of this little beetle who's moving crap across the earth. We're not even thinking that it's looking to the stars to navigate how to get back home. This is amazing. And so there's a sense that I don't want to move to these big theological things without just acknowledging that God is amazing in what it is. That the casual reading of Genesis 1, there's a fascinating nature to our God who is creative. And then the last thing, I think there is a brilliance of not just what is made, but honestly how it's made. I want you to notice at the beginning of all these days, it says, and God said. Now, we're going to talk more about Genesis 1 and 2 next week, but I will just acknowledge right now, the word God appears 35 times in Genesis 1. There's not even 35 verses, you guys. 35 times. He's clearly the main character of this story, at least up to chapter 1 and throughout the entire Bible. Now, that being said, what the rest of the Bible is going to do is going to bring honor to this God that's mentioned 35 times in chapter 1 because of what he created. What I mean by that is in Jeremiah 32:17, it says, Ah, Lord God, it is you who had made the heavens and the earth by your great power and by your outstretched arm. Nothing is too hard for you. Psalm 33 says, shouts for joy in the Lord. O you righteous, praise befits the upright. Verse 2, give thanks to the Lord with the lyre, make melody to him with the harp of 10 strings. Sing to the Lord a new song. And then verse 4 says, for. And then it's going to describe these things. So why should we sing to the Lord for a new song? Well, in verse 6 it tells us, for, here it is, by the word of the Lord the heavens were made, by the breath of the mouth of his mouth all their hosts. He gathers the waters of the sea as a heap. He puts the deeps in the storehouse. In Psalm 24, or 124, verse 8, David is in a moment where he's questioning his safety. And then he realizes, I am safe because of God. And the way that he calibrates this is, I am safe because of the God who created all things. Listen to what he says in Psalm 124:8. Our help is in the name of the Lord. Why does that matter? Well, he's the one, quote, who made heaven and earth. You know, Isaiah 42, verse 5 uses creation as a nameplate for God. Like a descriptive adjectival statement. It says this in Isaiah 42:5. Thus says God the Lord, who created the heavens and stretched them out, who spread out the earth what comes from it, what gives breath to the people on it, and the spirit to those who walk in it. Romans chapter 1, verse 20, which maybe you're more acquainted with. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived. Where? Ever since the creation of the world and the things that he has made. Or at the very end, you want to know what kind of songs you're going to be singing? For all of eternity, the kind of songs that we're going to be singing. Revelation chapter 4, verse 11. Worthy are you, O Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power. Why? For you created all things by your will. They existed and were created. Now here's the last closing thought I want to leave you with. The combination of how things are made with the one who made them actually becomes the predominant idea in the New Testament for creation. What I mean by that is, God is the one who's receiving glory all throughout Scripture about creation. But as you roll into the New Testament, there seems to be this reflecting glory to the man Jesus Christ. And then we go back to Genesis 1 and we see that God spoke it all, spoke it all, spoke it all. So God didn't get his hands dirty. He didn't put his, no, he didn't. He didn't. He spoke all things into existence. And then we're confused how all these things came into being until the New Testament. The New Testament actually puts flesh on the speaking, meaning in Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 and 17, how are all things made? Colossians 1 answers this. He, Jesus, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authority. All things were created through him, Jesus, and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So we're to give glory to God, but Jesus isn't in Genesis, but he is. When he spoke, if that's not enough, Romans chapter 11, verse 36, for from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be glory forever, talking about Jesus. Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 through 3. Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he spoke to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things. Here it is, through whom he created the world. So God creates all things. How did he create? He created it through Jesus. More definitively, in John chapter 1, verses 1 through 3, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things, so this Word that was with God, all things were made through him, and without him, not anything made that was made. So there's a sense that now we go back to Genesis 1, and now we see through an entire exegesis of Scripture that Jesus was always there. That it's actually Jesus that you pray to that created the dung beetle. That was Jesus. Jesus put all of that together. And we should stand back as we read Genesis 1 and go, Jesus, you're a bad man. Like you are legit. Like you came to earth and entered into your creation that you yourself created. That's awesome. We should read Genesis 1 and bring glory to Jesus. Let's pray.